All right, welcome to the Otherppl Show. My name is Brad Listi, and I'm in Los Angeles. The Otherppl podcast is a weekly program featuring in-depth interviews with today's leading authors. I'm happy to have you here. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Bluesky and Instagram. So I'll be talking with Andrew Lipstein today. He is making his triumphant return, celebrating the publication of a new novel called Something Rotten. It was published earlier this year by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. And it's another novel from Andrew Lipstein that does what I love for works of literary fiction to do, in that it is smart, it is propulsive, it is gripping, it is funny, it's dark, it's doing all of these things. And he is a very gifted writer who has been on a run. This is his third novel published in 3 years. And, I've seen it said that these 3 books are a kind of trilogy. You'll hear Andrew and I talk about this. It's not entirely what he intended, but these books do have some shared thematic concerns. And Something Rotten is I guess thriller-ish might be a little bit much, but it's got a mystery at the heart of it. And it's a book that calls into question the meaning of truth in the modern world. It's a relationship book. It's a book about a guy named Ruben who is dislocated, both geographically, because he's in Denmark with his Danish wife and their young baby. And then he's also dislocated from, I think, his sense of self. Professionally, he has been canceled due to an unfortunate error. And so he's lost his work identity, and then he's in Denmark for a while, and he's kind of remaking himself. And stuff happens. So you'll hear Andrew and I talk about all of this in the conversation ahead. Andrew Lipstein, coming up in just a moment. Today's episode of the Otherppl Show is brought to you by Harper Books, publisher of So Far Gone, the new novel by #1 New York Times bestselling author Jess Walter. His other books include Beautiful Ruins and The Cold Millions. So Far Gone is a hilarious and poignant adventure about a reclusive journalist named Reese Kinnick, who is racing to save his kidnapped grandchildren. This is a novel that takes place in the heart of modern America. It combines humor, heart, and social commentary in the spirit of Charles Portis's True Grit. It's a road trip style exploration of cultural chaos and second chances in the modern United States. That is So Far Gone, the new novel by Jess Walter, available from Harper Books. So a quick plug for my weekly email newsletter before we get going. You can subscribe over at bradlisti.substack.com. It's a great way to keep up with this podcast. I will let you know about new episodes on a weekly basis. I also share a list of links to things that I've been reading and finding interesting. So it's easy. It's straightforward. It's just, here are the new episodes of the show, and here are 10 things that I've been reading and finding interesting, delivered to your inbox. If that sounds good, you can sign up over at bradlisti.substack.com. I also want to give a quick plug to my new company, Deep Dive, which specializes in the creation of long-form educational audio. The debut course from Deep Dive is called How to Write a Novel. I am the host of the course. It proceeds as a series of dialogues with dozens of today's leading writers. All told, How to Write a Novel will feature more than 50 hours of instruction from some of today's finest working authors, including Melissa Broder, Emily St. John Mandel, Hannah Pittard, Steve Almond, Antoine Wilson, Stephen Graham Jones, Madeline Lucas, Purchista Hakpur, Vivi Ganeshananthan, Wahinivara, who just appeared on the podcast, in the last episode. So it's going to be really cool when it's all done and ready to roll. We should be launching this summer. That's the trajectory. I can't give you a specific date yet, but it's coming soon. So if you want to join the wait list, you can do that at www.deepdive.audio, and you can follow Deep Dive on Instagram and Bluesky, and I will, of course, keep you posted here on the show. All right, so my guest, once again, is Andrew Lipstein. His latest novel is called Something Rotten, and it is available from Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. Andrew is the author of the novels Last Resort, which was published in 2022, and The Vegan, which was published in 2023. I talked with Andrew about The Vegan on this program in an episode, I think, last year? I forget what number episode it is, but you can look it up. So he's back for a second time, and I could not be more delighted to share our conversation with you right now. So here I am with Andrew Lipstein, and his new novel, one more time, is called Something Rotten.
I always love being told by someone a perspective on my book or books that I don't agree with, because I often have to stop and think about it. And I think it's equally as valid as my point of view, because my point of view is shrouded in being from me. In conversations with my editor, originally, he kind of posed them as a trilogy once he read Something Rotten. And I thought, I didn't think that was right at first. And I was just recently talking about this with another writer, that the books that you've written, like the realm of your books, always feels like each node on that realm is much farther from the other nodes than any given reader will think, because you, by dint of being one person and having one sensibility and having one lifetime of experience behind every book you write, your creative world is just so much smaller than the creative world out there. Which isn't to say, as an artist, you shouldn't try to expand your horizons. And in a way, my instinct against being told that my first 3 books were a trilogy was born from this idea of like, oh, well, maybe I'm not pushing myself creatively enough, which I do think is always true. Whenever I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next, I always would love to escape the category that I've previously made for myself. But I do see why someone would think that. I mean, all 3 of my first 3 books are about, as I think the New York Times said, privileged New York men who sort of can't help but self-destruct their lives. That being said, Something Rotten, my most recent book, it is, I think, more of a piece with my first book, Last Resort, than it is with my second, but I hope doing things that are completely different. Obviously, it takes place in another country, and a lot of the book's purview is about culture in itself and differences in culture and someone being caught between cultures, whereas my first 2 books sort of take culture totally for granted and don't even see it as a subject or something worth inspecting.
Yeah, I mean, just to give listeners kind of a setup, we've got a guy named Ruben and his wife Cecile. They have a young baby named Arnie, and Ruben has been canceled because he forgot to turn off Zoom during, like, he was an NPR reporter. He forgot to turn off Zoom and then was caught on camera, like essentially having sex with Cecile. Right? And so that's kind of his like professional downfall. And we meet him in the aftermath of that. Cecile is Danish and is a reporter for the New York Times and has a successful career going for herself, but she's not necessarily happy at work. And so she has maternity leave with Arnie, and they go back to Copenhagen for, 2 months?
Yeah.
That's the setup. Like that's where we kind of launch with these characters. And I think I've talked with you a little bit about this in the past because I know you're married to a Dane. And I'm very capable as like a left-leaning American of idealizing Scandinavia and like the sort of, what is it, the democratic socialist politics of that region, and how those countries seem to work, right? And like the social safety net is there, and people, I always see Denmark showing up like really high on like the happiness indexes and stuff like that. And, you know, so it was fun for me to get to travel. I always love to travel in fiction and to be someplace besides the United States, like just because I love to travel, but don't get to do enough of it. And because this country is stressful. But I'd love to just talk with you about setting your novel in Denmark and just to hear some of your experiences of being there and trying to kind of bridge this cultural divide. And maybe trying to write into it, you know, that's its own particular challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny going into the book. You know, I don't think there's any genre that's more boring up front than the travelogue. Is that what's called, travelogue?
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
when a writer just writes about their travels, to me, it's sort of in the same category as writing about a drug experience or writing about a dream, where the context is so intrinsically interesting, but only if it was real life. Whereas writing about drugs or dreams or being in a new place sort of has so many assumptions of how interesting it will be, and everything sort of justified that things are different. And it's really actually hard to make a reader feel like they are in the real experience. So going into it, I was kind of already thinking like, how can I escape that as much as possible? And how can I escape just like paragraphs telling a reader about what it would be like for them to live this experience and to be there, and to actually make sure that everything I wrote about came back to the story. That being said, yeah, so my wife is Danish. We have been there maybe 6 or 7 times over the past 5 or 6 years since we've been together, and often for long periods of time. So I did have like a bank of memories and recollections that I wanted to call on. And, you know, I think Copenhagen, as you said, is a place that a lot of American liberals sort of idealize, and not even wrongly. I don't mean to say idealize as like the truth isn't as beautiful as it seems, because from our point of view and the issues we're concerned with, it is basically utopian, especially as someone who has a family, as we both have, and has been through the ringer of just trying to raise that family in a country that seems bent on making life difficult for people who want to procreate for some reason, even though it seems like that's kind of what a government should want and care about. But yeah, it's kind of a place that's built as if the government's purpose was to take care of its people and the next generations of its people. That being said, I don't think that system would necessarily work in America, but basically seeing that divide from both Ruben and Cecilia's perspective, I thought it was important to always challenge assumptions and never try to present an opinion to the reader, but just sort of give them the perspective that I have gleaned over the years.
Yeah, I mean, there are differences, and it's important. I think it's an important point that like you couldn't just overlay the Danish system onto America and like snap your fingers and it would work. Like there are a lot of fundamental differences in the way that the countries are sort of structured, like the population.
And there's the size and also the lack of diversity, you know,
right.
And like in every sense of the word diversity. And you know, that is one of my personal biggest problems with the country. And I hope it comes through in some way through the book. But I feel like in a country like Denmark, you just get a relatively small sliver of what is possible from life. And it happens to be a sliver that is aesthetically beautiful, culturally beautiful, priorities wise on the mark, especially to someone like us. But at the end of the day, they are solving a problem that is so much, I think, easier than a country like America, which if it has one thing going for it, it is diversity in many senses of that word. But yeah, I mean, it was funny actually. The Times recently covered why democratic socialism has worked so well in Denmark as opposed to other countries. And one of the key reasons is that those on the left have often conceded this idea of immigration and have often allowed a more rightward turn on that issue, basically to make the rest of their agenda palatable. And that's obviously an issue here that is extremely important to voters, as we saw in the last election. And it's just all to say that there is no such thing as like a perfect leftist agenda that could capture an entire nation without there being concessions, compromises, or even great sacrifices.
So among the many differences between life in Denmark and life in the United States in a contemporary context, there are differences in the ways in which like gender roles are performed, the way they play out, concepts of masculinity, concepts of femininity. Your novel is exploring, I think, modern masculinity. I think on some level, all of your novels are exploring this. It's like a thematic concern. And there is a relationship. So Reuben and is it Cecilia or Cecile?
Cecilia.
Okay. So Cecilia and Reuben go back to Denmark. They're staying with Cecilia's mother. And, you know, Cecilia had a journalism career in Copenhagen before she went to New York to pursue a job with the New York Times. And so she's got this circle of friends that she left behind in Denmark who are pretty much all journalists. Mm-hmm. And Reuben is kind of the outsider who's kind of there as her husband and trying to sort of integrate and ingratiate and, you know, meet her friends and kind of enmesh himself in whatever ways he can into her life and into like the Danishness of things. And he becomes pals with a guy named Mikkel, who is a charismatic figure. He's got a big job at, what's the name of the newspaper, forgive me, in Copenhagen? The big Danish newspaper?
Well, he's at Berlingske.
Okay.
But Politiken is the other one.
Forgive me. But he's got he's a journalist. And then Cecilia's ex-boyfriend, Jonas, is also a figure in this book. And they learn, is battling like a life-threatening neurological condition. So he's seriously ill. That's another part of the setup. And I just want to talk about this relationship without giving up the game, because there's a lot that I think readers need to kind of find for themselves. That's the fun of the book, and I don't want to spoil it. But there's a really funny and interesting plot line about Reuben and Mikkel and the ways in which Reuben kind of sorts out his masculinity and also sheds some of the weight that he's been carrying in the wake of his cancellation. You know, I think by leaving the United States and being in Denmark, where, you know, his cancellation is less of an issue, getting out of the hothouse of New York, where, like, you know, all these people work in media and it's more known, you know, what he's done and what happened to him, I think maybe is liberating for him.
Yeah, I think, you know, someone like Mikkel, who is borderline, you know, he's irreverent, borderline offensive, usually says things to get a rise out of other people. A man who's sort of proud of being a man, which in an American context is something that you wouldn't ever find in a liberal environment, I think. At least someone who is openly proud of that fact and is using it as identity building. Someone like that, for someone like Reuben, who has basically been on the underside of progressivism in America, who feels left out of the cultural direction of liberalism. Someone like that is incredibly appealing to Reuben, because in Mikkel, he basically finds someone who negates the environment that he failed within. And I think, you know, when someone is in a new culture, there's so much projection and there's so much, you know, it's kind of like when you break up with someone, the next person you meet, you often project all of what you didn't get from the last person onto them. And over time, you know, that never works out. Projection isn't real and it's not sustainable. And the same could be said of how we treat other cultures or new environments we enter. And a lot of this is Reuben projecting his needs of his life onto Mikkel and Danish society. But a lot of it is true, where, in my experience, the treatment of masculinity in Denmark is so much less fraught. It's very straightforward. I don't think masculinity is necessarily celebrated as something that is worth celebrating in Denmark, but I think there's just so much less hand-wringing over sex. By sex, I mean biological sex and gender. And what I think is interesting, especially about a country like Denmark, when I first spent time there, I sort of actually thought that people were somewhat culturally backwards sometimes because of the loose comment they would say that struck me as not very well considered. And of course, like having just a total lack of diversity, there's certain concepts like appropriation that they definitely totally miss the mark and don't get. But what I didn't realize is that part of the reason why Danish culture is the way it is because they've been progressive for such a long time. And I think even around issues such as homosexuality, where in America, we're sort of, I feel like even in the past 5 or 10 years, getting out of this period where we're not natural with that concept in mainstream culture, in movies and things. Even if you look at movies from 10 years ago and there's a gay character, it's even hard to watch from today because we're just escaping the fact that we can put forth that gay and straight people are entirely equal in a cultural atmosphere. Denmark has gotten over that so long ago that homosexuality is treated there in such a more, just a less weird light. I mean, people talk about it in such a straightforward way that when I first heard it, I thought it was almost backwards, but I didn't realize that it had been so normal for so long that people can talk about it way more openly than they ever could here. And I think the same is true for gender roles too. I think because feminism, as it is taken very seriously in American society, is still relatively new to us. Obviously, the movement isn't new, and it has been a strong current in American society for the past 60, 70 years. But it's still so new to us that we do have like hang-ups about it that we don't even realize. And I think it almost feels like a live wire issue, whereas there, gender equality is so enmeshed in their culture that there doesn't have to be a reflexive sort of put down of men.
Yeah, I mean that's a reflexive put down of men. I feel like because America's maybe behind the times or behind where Denmark is in terms of its comfort level with these issues. I think, like, would you say that it's fair to say that there might be some overcorrections on the American left? Like sometimes I feel like I mean, you're laughing, but I mean, I do feel like and you can't even say that because it's like,
of course. I think, and I put this in a scene in a book, but even there's certain things that in America, if you were just to say them out loud, any socially apt person would catch themselves before they said it out loud. But if you actually consider the thought, you realize that it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's just we're so caught in the wrangle of like making sure that everything we say is super correct. And an example of that is, there's two examples. One is just when you have a baby and you find out that baby's sex, if it's a girl, both parents will openly say, "I'm so happy it's a girl." You could never possibly say that about it being a boy. And I think it would be weird for people just to want one sex or the other. But the fact that no father could say, "I found out we were having a boy and I'm happy about that fact," is ridiculous. But if you were to say that in any liberal environment, I think people would assume that you were MAGA, that you were a kind of a provocateur, that maybe you're on a few weird subreddits, that you were on 4chan or 8chan or 16chan or 32chan or whatever.
Wait, are there multiple chans?
No. Luckily, I don't have that much visibility into the chan world. But it's one of those things that it's a very natural thing to think and to assume that as a liberal man, you can't be happy that you're having a boy. I think no one actually thinks that. It's just part of the discourse. And another example of that is just to say, I'm happy that I'm a man, or I appreciate the aspects of my personality that I believe are masculine. Because from the get-go, I think, and again, this goes back to the fact that we aren't a progressive society, and we do have so many actual inequalities built into our system that in order to prove that you are a feminist and believe in gender equality, you have to put your hand on the scale so much to demonstrate who your progressive bona fides. But to even say, like, I like the parts of myself that are masculine, I think at a baseline, to hear someone say that in a liberal environment, you'd assume that they were like had an RFK tattoo, when in fact that thought is actually, I think, perfectly logical, and anyone in their heart of hearts wouldn't be able to disagree with it or find it actually provocative on a realistic personal level.
I wonder which culture has the healthiest masculinity. It does make me curious to think about like the divide that you're sort of writing into between Denmark and the United States, and thinking globally, like which country produces the healthiest men? Like,
I think that the answer is pretty simple. I mean, I think it would be a 1-to-1 correlation with a country that has the most gender equality, because they don't have hangups about these issues, and there isn't all this like hand wringing, I think.
And with Denmark does a better job of this. Like, they have more gender equality there than we do here.
Oh, that's for certain. I mean, I wouldn't say. I would assume Denmark is very, very high in that list. I obviously don't have as much perspective on other countries, but as far, I mean, I'm sure there's some recognized statistic to measure gender equality, and I hope it wouldn't come just down to pay, but obviously that's a very important factor of it. But for example, in Denmark, for like parental leaves, the couple divides up a year. They get a year, which of course is on its own pretty remarkable. But there are more and more pushes to basically bookmark a certain portion of that 12 months that the man has to take to ensure gender equality. And I think that just wouldn't be feasible in a lot of other countries in the world, because especially if the man is usually the breadwinner, that's like a financially difficult proposition to society. But yeah, I would imagine Denmark is for sure up there.
It's hard to like think about contemporary America and contemporary American men across the spectrum and imagine how we get to like a genuinely healthy place.
Yeah, because it feels like we moved further away from we're weird about gender stage, because honestly, the past election was a battle of honestly going back to like what place in society should women partake and belong. And it seemed like a lot of people on the right, for them, that was having children. That's kind of women's primary purpose. It seemed like a lot of the rhetoric, obviously, especially from J.D. Vance, was for a woman to be childless is like basically an original sin. And to even have that conversation and have that be a part of the discourse is like 30 years off of our progress. And, all of that doesn't make it better. That type of rhetoric and point of view, I don't think makes it better to be a man, because obviously it's called progressivism for a reason, is that you eventually, as a society, as you become more advanced and evolved, you push past an issue like that. And as a civilization, you hope to get to a place where you no longer think of women as breeders. So I don't think that something like that makes it better to be a man by giving men more power, because it's just setting back the clock.
Yeah, and there's that whole like trad wife trend or thing that's happening on TikTok, where you have all these women like churning butter and like having like 11 kids or whatever. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen these videos?
I do. My perspective of that, I mean, I remember that from, I think, around kind of the post 2016 election too, or even before. I actually consider that more of a sort of ironic reaction to center leftism and moderate liberalism, where because most of the people on TikTok, or at least like a few podcasts like that I followed back then, like Red Scare or etc., it was more like, it felt more ironic and like a provocation against what was seen as like a more appropriate liberalism. But I honestly don't spend that much time on TikTok today, so I'm not sure if that whole thing has been taken up by like a Gen Z population, in which case I am gratefully ignorant of it.
Yeah, I don't watch a lot of it either. I've just seen, during my brief foray into TikTok, I was somehow served up videos of, I think it was some woman in Utah who was like, super hot and like done up and like making like elaborate meals, constantly.
Oh, okay. If it was Utah, then it definitely wasn't a part of the dirtbag left. Or probably, it probably wasn't ironic. I don't know if irony has gotten that far to those communities yet, but
well, you got Ruben in Denmark, and he's palling around with Mikkel, who, is charismatic and maybe creates a kind of permission structure for Ruben to rethink himself and his relationship to himself and to being a man. I hope I'm not spoiling too much to say that Ruben gets an ill-advised tattoo. He's like smoking and drinking and kind of just like, he shaves his head, right? He does all these things that are kind of funny and yet make like a psychological difference to him. And not only make a psychological difference to him, but interestingly, they make a psychological and relational difference for Cecilia. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a laboratory. And, that's one layer of the plot. Another layer of the plot is Cecilia worrying about her ex, Jonas, and his health situation. And then there is a plot involving Mikkel's work as a journalist and a political scandal that he's covering involving, I don't forget the name, like what would be the title of, it's Peterson is I think the name of the politician. But
yeah, he's like a far right. He's part of one of the more traditional far right parties in Denmark.
Running for office. Or in office.
Yeah, he's like the leader of the party.
Okay. So there's a lot of different threads that you're weaving, and it kind of it's got a page turner quality, and it's got a really admirable your all of your work kind of does this. Like you have a really great ability to thwart reader expectations. Like just when I think I had a handle on it, it would take a turn. And I've talked to you in the past about your approach to writing, and I think you did an outline for this book, but I'm sure you probably didn't adhere to it super religiously.
I don't usually outline.
Okay, but you did for this book because of its plottiness?
Well, the book has like one big twist that it would have been impossible to write from the start without being aware of. And I did know that from the beginning, but generally, I'm always thinking about plot, but I like to surprise myself so that I can surprise a reader. And I really do believe in the power of a subconscious. So I kind of keep plot threads available to me to then use later, but in a way that I wouldn't have anticipated perhaps at the time, because at the end of the day, I don't think anyone is smart enough to draw out an outline of a plot that would be surprising to a smart reader from the beginning. So I always just try to keep things as dynamic as possible.
It's more fun that way rather than just like setting it all down and then just writing into like a super detailed outline.
I couldn't even sit down to write if I knew what was going to happen. I don't think I would be as interested enough in the material.
And you are working, this is your third novel in 3 years.
Third novel published in 3 years, yeah.
So that's a pretty furious pace.
It has been. It stops now. I'm working on a book that is very, very different from what I wrote before, and not in the way that I think it's different, but it's actually then going to become seen as a four-part series with my previous 3 books. But yeah, I mean, I wrote my first 2 books when I had 0 kids. I wrote Something Rotten when I had 1 kid, and now I have 3 kids. And my pace is, I'm trying to be generous with myself as far as my pace. But yeah, I hope this book will be done at the end of the year.
Wow. So it's interesting. You got 3 babies, essentially, right? Or what's the age range?
Well, my oldest is 4, so he wouldn't be a baby, but I still consider him one.
Close enough, yeah. You have 3 boys?
Mm-hmm.
Oh man,
it's what I get, right, for writing 3 books about men.
I was going to say,
yeah.
So you're raising them in the United States in this like very fraught time, even though you I think technically you could be raising them in Denmark. I'm sure there are people listening, like dedicated, progressive, literary, probably American listeners who are like, what is he still doing here? Why isn't he in Copenhagen taking advantage of like the welfare state and the childcare and the parental leave? And
well, they're wondering the same things as my wife is wondering.
Yeah. But I'd be curious to hear your response. Like just that, just like what's the rationale for staying in America when things are this fucked up?
Yeah, I mean, if there was any time to live in Denmark, it would be now when we have daycare costs and things like that, because daycare is relative to what we pay here free. I did work this into the book a bit when Ruben imagines his son. This is during his most gung-ho, I could integrate into Danish society mindset, and he imagines his son as a Danish man. And it's only at that point that he sort of, something catches in his throat and he hesitates. And for me, and it's not just that I was born in America and I consider myself American and want my kids to be American, because I think obviously my wife's experience and perspective is just as valid. What makes me hesitate when I imagine growing our family in Denmark and them being Danish is, and we touched on this a bit earlier, but I worry that their lives would take place in a much more narrow environment than mine does. And for me, that has always been the greatest part about living in New York, but America more broadly, is that and when I say diversity, I do mean diversity as far as demographically, but I just mean diversity of lived experience and ideas and what people do with their lives and how a life plays out, to me is one of the most valuable things about being a person. And it's one things that actually makes me feel like the way we live now is different from before. I am like a pathological, there's no such thing as like progress, and times right now are not greater or much worse than they've ever been. But as far as the number of experiences that are available to any given person, we've obviously never been in a greater time than now for that. If I just imagine my kids living in a more narrow society, there's something in me that just freezes up, which I'm sort of just like outing myself as an America lover, which I feel like is almost synonymous with like being a lunatic or a psychopath. But I do think there are amazing things about this country, as fucked up as it is, and as the leadership is, and how many people are suffering, and how unequal of a society we are. I think there, not to sound like Trump, but there's never been another country like it, because there hasn't, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the demographic diversity, the size of the land, the land mass of it's a huge country. I mean, it's not the biggest, but it's big. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people here, and a lot of different kinds of people here. And it's been working up until now, like in a messy way, or at least in a contemporary sense. The original sin of this country, and, all of it, it's stolen land. It's built on the early part of this country. We were enslaving African people. I mean, it's not the prettiest history, but in a contemporary sense, like 20th century America made some progress. I don't know. I have complicated feelings about it. You can hear me sort of like struggling to form an opinion. I don't want to sound like I'm too pro, but I also think like to just be totally negative about all of it does miss some of the virtues of this place. And like what's worth fighting for, I guess.
I think frustration comes out most when you love something the most, because if we really didn't care about this country, I think we would care a lot less about seeing, the rampant rise of fascist impulses. So I think it's almost refreshing, or we should be allowed to say what we love about America instead of focusing on the parts of it that are crumbling. But it's hard to do so without like seeming like you're a pro-Trump lunatic.
What's the religious situation in Denmark? It can't be like a super religious country, right?
Yeah, it's like basically everyone or a lot of people are technically members of the church, but like the faith is not a common part of life. It's weird because Christianity, like the holidays and Christmas they're not even considered religious holidays. They're just considered Danish holidays, basically. And they have they're obviously built on religion, but like, as far as at least the people I've interacted with in Copenhagen, faith in itself is not a huge part of society in a way that feels very refreshing. And in fact, like a lot of our generation over there doesn't even get married because marriage is considered like a religious institution. And a lot of our friends are married. Marriage wasn't important to me and my wife, and we might not have even gotten married if it weren't for like more practical concerns. But I would say they have like a very healthy, pragmatic relationship with religion where it doesn't like work itself to the bone like it has in America, where even like Puritan values take over realms of our society that don't even have anything to do with religion.
Yeah, and I think one of the fundamental questions of your novel, and like one of the like fundamental questions of my life, and I think it's one of the fundamental questions at the heart of like just the human experience on planet Earth, and maybe in particular like what's been plaguing America for so long, is this question of how to resolve the tension between like collective responsibility and individual liberty. Mm-hmm. And you write about this in the book, you know, how Danish culture is like much more uniform than American culture, and the collective responsibility piece takes precedence over the individual liberty piece, whereas I think things are flipped in America. Mm-hmm. And there's a line in your book that really kind of like stabbed me in the heart, and I think it was Cecilia talking about it, though I could be wrong, where it was like how exhausting America is because the way things are set up, you know, you basically have to fight for every last fucking thing. Mm-hmm. I forget who said that, but it's like, it's a brutal society that we've built in so many mm-hmm. ways, you know, like you were talking about earlier, the way we treat, you know, new parents trying to bring a child into the world and who might not have like extraordinary means. Like mm-hmm. the government of the United States by its actions doesn't really give a fuck about mm-hmm. those people or those babies, despite all of their like chest thumping, mm-hmm. you know? And so I don't know. I just would love to hear you talk a little bit about like how you think of the tension between collective responsibility and individual liberty, because I think both are important, but I think it's easy for the balance. The hard part is getting the balance right between mm-hmm. the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the very end of the road of believing that personal liberty is the most important thing is just reflexively thinking that everyone should have to fight for every single fucking thing, like which is ingrained in our idea system. Where even if we had abundance, I think a lot of people in the country would think that you shouldn't be able to live for free without working for it. And even if we, you know, obviously don't want to talk about AI, but when we imagine AI taking jobs, or really any technology taking jobs, I think it is a very interesting and depressing irony that we don't see it as a good thing. Like if you were told to society 1,000 years ago that technology will relieve us of work while creating as much resource and abundance as we had before, if not a lot more, why wouldn't that be a good thing? And the answer is because we don't believe in people getting things without working for it. If we imagined a society in 500 years from now where only 10% of the population had to work, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? But we just can't wrap our heads around the fact that people should be able to live their lives without earning through hard work what they get. And it's not like I don't believe in hard work. Obviously, I do. And I think it can be one of the most rewarding things about being a human, especially today. But that's just the end of the personal liberty road, is just believing that why would the government give something to someone because they need it unless they get something in return? Everything is transactional in a capitalist system. But on the other side, you know, even with our most creative, young, exciting friends in Copenhagen, there is a moment where you do something slightly different and you feel, by you, I mean, I have felt a social correction to what you have done. And this could be something as small as like eating something in a weird, mixing two foods in a weird way, or just something as simple as organizing your day in a certain way, or wanting to raise your kids in a certain way. When you go there, you notice, you know, even in a material aspect, that everybody literally buys the same exact brands. And the curriculum for schools and the way of raising your kid is so well aligned in a way that almost seems to me like a hallmark of an advanced society. But of course, I find it I feel very claustrophobic in that type of environment. And I think that is what you find in a lot of collective societies where personal liberty isn't necessarily a high priority. And that's one of the reasons, just to go back to like talking about my feelings about having a family there or being there, is something that I just feel intrinsically, and more the more time I spend there, that it isn't in America. I feel like you get points just for being original, even if it's in a way that doesn't even make sense, or it doesn't even provide actual value. But over there, it sometimes feels like the exact opposite.
Yeah, it's a tricky question because I hear you. And I think like there is a part of me, like living in Los Angeles, you're in New York. I think this could manifest anywhere, but in cultural capitals with like really high population, high populations and then high population density, you see a lot. And there's something sort of marvelous about like being in Manhattan and just like walking around and just being like, wow, people are there's all sorts of different people here. I love that about it. But I think like where I'm at, and it's not a fixed position, and I don't have like some elaborate, beautifully drawn theory or something, but it's like, I think that collective responsibility is the slightly deeper truth to the existence that we're leading. Mm-hmm. We're all interconnected. Our fates are bound, whether we like it or not. The like reality itself is a lot deeper and more mysterious and like almost magical than I think we realize most of the time. And yet, individual liberty is interconnected with that. That's a facet of it. And so I guess like the place that I land is like, yes, like if we're going to figure out an optimal way to organize human societies, it would be balanced in such a way that collective responsibility was more important, but not too much more important than individual liberty. It would be, there would be a recognition of the interrelated nature of the two, and a recognition of collective responsibility being the deeper truth.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the reason why collective, in a collective society, when somebody else struggles or fails, you think this is our fault. But in America, in a purely liberty-driven country, you think this is their fault. And kind of like blame or responsibility, that second camp immediately violates the truth that you pointed out, which is that we do live in a society and that person is failing because of society and not necessarily themselves. But where that, I think, needs to be hedged by did you say 40%, 60-40? Is that what you said?
No, I don't think I gave it a number, but that might be, if we had to pick a number. That's what I imagined
in my head.
Yeah.
But where that needs to come in is, every time I come home from Denmark and I get used to it and I forget what it's like to be in America, I'm always shocked by the cars and the driving, the number of different cars. And you look at a parking lot and it's like looking at, it's kind of like the difference of a country. Oddly enough, there's no like, orthodontia isn't really considered a thing in Denmark, whereas here, like we straighten our teeth like in a way that I think Freud would have a fun time with. But like when you look at the parking lot situation, it's the exact opposite. When you look at a parking lot in Copenhagen, it's like if somebody hasn't parked perfectly parallel, they'll take the time to repark. Whereas when I come back and look at America, I see a parking lot and it's like all the cars were just like dropped from the sky, and wherever they landed. And of course, like, and it's kind of like, a very neat sort of metaphor for just how we are as a people, where like we all just kind of don't care so much about fitting in. But then when I'm walking down our street when we come back from a trip in Denmark, and I don't even live in a particularly diverse neighborhood, I am astonished by the number of individual personalities I see. I'm just like, oh my God, like look at that guy. What's he doing over there? I can't believe this person's so different from them. The people you see, what goes on in their heads, their ideas about the world are just so fundamentally different. And it's almost kind of depressing to realize how quickly you forget about that when you're in a different place, because we only really like adapt ourselves to our immediate society. And it is so easy to forget what else is out there.
Do you have hope for America? I mean, I guess you sort of have to, especially if you're raising kids here, but like, do you see a way forward in the immediate term where things could correct and we could get onto like a saner path?
I think I do. I mean, I think I'm actually kind of more of an optimist in this regard. I think Trump is also kind of exceptional in many ways. By that, I mean, he's an exception. And, as far as the Democratic Party goes, I don't know if they've ever been in such a more demolished state. And therefore, I have hope that will involve a rebuilding that I think would be presenting an agenda to the public that, I think the ironic thing about, when you said Denmark is a democratic socialist country, it's hard as an American to hear that second word and not hesitate. I think we have such a bad relationship with socialism. I would be in favor of just scratching it completely and not talking about socialism or, God forbid, communism or anything that we can point to a country like Venezuela, that Fox News can show clips of Venezuela and say, look, do you want us to make us more like them? I think just presenting a socialist agenda, what it is, which is a program, a welfare state built to have the backs of the majority of people, would be a compelling agenda. And, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic that where the Democratic Party is today, that they could take more of an ambitious swing, because what else is there? I mean, if we just stay the course, we're just going to continue to lose.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the failures of the Democratic Party are profound, like in its modern incarnation. And I worry, they've sort of sold us out. There's a lot of corporate Democrats, or whatever you want to call them, centrists, who they gave, what did we lose? We lost women's bodily autonomy. We might lose gay marriage. Trans rights are under attack.
Well, that wasn't the Democratic Party, though. I mean, that was just us losing. That wasn't part of the Democratic agenda.
Well, of course not. But I'm just saying that, like, for all of the strategy failed is the point. And it was on their watch. Like, they could have codified Roe when Obama was president. They didn't. And I don't know. I just think that, like, people are angry for good reason with Democrats. I certainly am. And I'm so tired of Democrats being like, well, we just can't because it's just too hard, or we don't have the votes, or like, fuck that. I want some bold leadership. I'm ready for somebody to say, we're going to do it, and we're going to make things better, and we're going to take care of people, and we're going to do our jobs and get money out of politics, and like make the government work for ordinary people, and not be essentially like a service arm of like the billionaire class, or, the oligarchs. And I don't know. I feel like we're a ways away from realizing that, but I think it's what has to happen.
Well, I think the Republicans are so much better at concrete action. And, I touch on this in the book when Rubin is considering sort of this like philosophy that he's discovered in Miquel of, the only moral truths are what plays out in the actual world, and not virtue in and of itself. Being on the right side of history doesn't matter if you don't change the world in any way. And I just think in the past 5 or 10 years, Republicans have been so much better at putting their power to use and gaining power with practical means, as opposed to feeling like they've won just by being morally right, which I think has plagued the Democratic Party during that time. Yeah.
I mean, I have thoughts on this because I think about that too. And I hear people, especially on the left, bemoaning this, like, why won't the Republicans do this? They don't give a fuck. And it's like, yeah, I kind of think in a perverse way, politics is easier if you're totally unmoored from any kind of ethical responsibility, and for Democrats who are trying to hold the line and, at least broadly speaking, in terms of like constitutional democracy and standards of decency, and like the way that you're, the decorum of how to conduct yourself in government. Like, if that's the game you're playing, and you're playing against Trump and the modern GOP, who have no concern for any of that whatsoever, it's like asymmetrical warfare. Like, you're playing by some set of rules. Your opponent is playing by none of them, and then is winning. And then a lot of people are looking around going, what the fuck, like, you're losing. Why can't you be like these people? But then I worry that it becomes a race to the bottom if we all just unmoor ourselves from any kind of ethical standard, and we just say, fuck it, it's a dog fight in the gutter. Like, where does that lead us? And where does that leave us? I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you agree or disagree?
I mean, I want to agree. I kind of feel like politics is always, even when the Democratic leaders are cashing in their virtue for success when they're failing, they're actually just politicians at their heart, and they're, totally contrived anyway. So why not just use the power you have and actually build the country you want? I would be happier if the Democratic Party was 50% more depraved and Machiavellian if it meant that their agenda got implemented.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way. So, I mean, your book is not a super explicitly political novel, but these questions do sort of lie embedded at the heart of it. And, I feel like we can't talk about a lot of what makes this novel so great because it would rob listeners of being able to experience it from themselves. But I do want to underscore that there's a kind of delicious twist towards the end of this novel that it's kind of building up to, and it plays out kind of like a thriller / mystery. Like, was that your intent? Like, did you have that on your mind as you were writing it, or is that something that sort of was presented to you after the fact? And
yeah, I mean, the word thriller, I kind of have a complicated relationship with, just because, I feel like the book is, I feel like thriller almost implies that a book, that's the point of the book. And I see plot as like structure and something to build my book within. I love thinking about plot, and I think it can motivate a lot of what the book is saying. I don't consider my books a thriller, but like when like a publisher wants to throw that on marketing copy or something, I'm always amenable because I think it makes clear that the book is fundamentally gripping and entertaining, as I think all novels should be.
You're good at that, like writing I think like literary fiction that has that kind of page turner quality. And I think it's like a noble artistic achievement and aspiration, because like otherwise, like why make a book if you're not trying to like create like a gripping experience for people, right?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think literary fiction in general is kind of almost fine settling for being an artistic medium that no one engages with, which hasn't been the case, historically. I think literary fiction more and more thinks of itself as like a piece of art that's being shown in a very prestigious gallery, as opposed to something that is for everyone who is curious, but also wants to have a good experience. And I often find myself being extremely jealous of, for example, the film industry, where you have very artistic films being produced every year, while the art of it never being the point. I think people are almost like proud to read literary fiction as if it's some like dying species or, institution that needs to be like salvaged. Whereas like the act of experiencing it should be enough of a draw that it should be celebrated.
So again, you've published 3 novels in 3 years. You're working on your 4th, and you've managed to, like, I don't know, just have a kind of a start to your career that is enviable. And working with what is Jonathan Galassi, is it your editor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you are the kind of person who like sets a vision for what you'd like to achieve. Like, do you ever sit around thinking long term, or are you somebody who's just like project by project, day by day?
I do like think about goals and things I want to achieve, but then I realize when I actually think about, you could have a goal that could end up shaping the type of work that you want to write. Like, if you think to yourself, I want to win like a major award or a big award, that might shape like what genre or structure you deal with. And a lot of writers are capable of kind of formatting a book around that or having that inform a book. I literally can't even sit down to write if I'm not incredibly excited about a book. And the things that will make me do that are so narrow and particular that all those other concerns sort of melt away when I actually think about starting a project and moving forward with it. So yeah, I mean, I have goals and aspirations, but when it comes time to it, like writing a book is really fucking hard, and you're not going to spend time doing it unless you love it, and you can't control what makes you love a project. So I find that those issues don't end up mattering.
So this new book that you're working on, like I would never ask you to like tell me all the details, but like in terms of its concerns, can you at least share like what you're thinking about with it?
Well, I'm going to be like delightfully, frustratingly cagey because I haven't talked about it with basically anyone except for my wife and my editor and agent. But I will say that it is not fiction. And
oh wait, it's not fiction?
It's not fiction, no. And I mean, that in and of itself would would underwrite my next claim, which is that it's very different from what I've done before. But at the same time, I think it's still very of a piece of my previous 3 books.
Interesting. So is it a memoir, or is it like a long, like essayistic kind of thing?
It has memoirish qualities, and it's sort of about a subject. It isn't a collection of essays. It has a very primary focus.
Okay, so it's like a monolithic thing. It's not like a bunch of different pieces that are woven together.
Correct. Yep.
That's the most I'm going to get out of you.
Unfortunately, it is, because I really haven't, for many reasons, but most of all, just my instinct is that I haven't talked about it with anyone, and I've always kind of gone with my gut on these things. So
yeah, you're not alone. I think most writers I talk to are hesitant to talk about a work in progress too much, if for no other reason than it could change. Like, why do you don't want to marry yourself to something and then on the public record, and then 3 years later the book comes out and it's like a totally different thing.
Yeah, and I think that that's a big reason. I think another reason is, and I tell this to anyone who I meet who like hasn't published a book and is trying to muster the time and effort, I always recommend not talking about it, because it will feel like you are cashing in all of the thought and effort you'd put into the book so far for that ability to discuss this thing, and that can end up cannibalizing the project in and of itself. In the way, it's kind of like the tantric sex approach, I think, where like if you try to get value out of a book before you've actually made it, then you might find yourself not actually completing it. And I also just think it's nice to create a totally unpunctured artistic space in your mind with a few confidants, that you don't feel like that project is bleeding out into the world yet until it's totally complete.
I'm a little bit hurt that I'm not one of your confidants, Andrew.
Maybe like interview 4 or 5, we can reach that level. So
yeah, we're only on the second interview, so I feel like we're building towards confidant level. I'm curious, before I let you go, to ask about just this experience of publishing 3 generally well-received novels in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of like, there's a emotional experience and an interpersonal aspect to putting a book out into the world, right? Like you kind of, all the anticipation and the thrill of the book being released and finding readers, you've gotten that 3 years in a row. And I'm just curious to know, like, what kinds of interactions you've had with readers. Do you know what I'm saying? You've been in communication with readers like successively 3 years in a row. And I would imagine some people have followed you book to book.
I'm saying this as genuinely as possible, and I'm preempting what I'm saying with that, because it's kind of what you're supposed to say, but it has absolutely been my experience that is hearing from readers and reminding yourself that there are individual people engaging with your book is the single most rewarding part of the entire experience. And if you write a book and that book only gets sold to 30 people and 30 people read your book to completion, if you imagine each one of those 30 people spending as much time and mind space and emotions with your book, that totally changes the entire experience of it. It's easy to forget when you focus on other things, and during the publishing process, you often do. But it is just truly like, it will never stop being mind-blowing to me that somebody is spending that much time with something that I have created and spent so much time myself on. And that really does make the entire experience just worth it.
It closes the loop.
100%. Yeah. I mean, a book definitely totally lives between the writer and the reader. And I'm totally of the mindset that I'm creating an experience for the reader that they are filling in, not just obviously with their imagination as they fill in the details of what goes on in the book, but it's an experience that's meant to be lived, and they fill in the other half of that. And being reminded of that actually happens, to me, is just amazing.
Has anything that you've heard from readers really surprised you? Like, have you gotten responses to your work where you're like, whoa, like
always. Yeah. And in the beginning, you like asked me how I felt about my books being considered a trilogy. And whenever I have a negative reaction to something like that, or like, I disagree with that, that's when I know that I should pay more attention to it, because somebody thought that enough to actually usually look up my email address and send it to me. So somebody believes that strong enough to tell me. And I love being surprised and being proven wrong and getting new perspective on my books. And honestly, what readers have to say sometimes is so much more interesting than like what reviewers say, who are often like really hewing to a well ironed out format and way of doing things that can often feel like your book is just kind of being sent through the ringer or a conveyor belt.
Yeah. Yeah. I hate that when I read a New York Times review and it's like, oh, this book, it's really great. I really love it. I enjoyed this part of it. It was great. And then 3/4 of the way through, without fail, but its weaknesses.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay.
It's a format. And they quote a sentence, one out of, 30,000 sentences in a book that maybe didn't hit the mark. And it's like, okay. But when a reader like writes you an email that they just wrote off the cuff just for you to read, all they wanted was to communicate to you their thoughts. That's just like the medium of human connection. They just want, and I love it. I love it. Even people write me with like suggestions of how I should have done things differently, or even like weird grammatical things that I'm like, I'm talking to a person right now who felt compelled enough to tell me this about this work that I spent so much time on. And all throughout that process, all I was doing it for was for someone to read it. And here's proof of that. So it really is just the entire world.
It doesn't even take that much. Just a few of those can, I don't know, from my experience anyway, like getting letters like that, it's like, okay, the work is out there. It reached some people. That's really all you can hope for. And anything beyond that is kind of gravy. But so will you be summering in Copenhagen? Are you going to be in Denmark?
We're going there for 2 months this summer. We couldn't go last year because of our infants, but now they're babies. And we'll be spending 2 months there this summer.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Well, congratulations on Something Rotten and all the success that you've been having. And I wish you well with this like mysterious nonfiction book of an unspecified nature.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go. That was Andrew Lipstein talking with me about his new novel, Something Rotten, available from FSG. You can find Andrew on the internet at alipstein.com. Follow him on Twitter and Instagram, and check out his book. Check out all of his books. All 3 of them are really good. Last Resort, The Vegan, and now Something Rotten. Don't forget to subscribe to the Otherppl Show wherever you get your podcasts. Hit the subscribe button. You can also subscribe on YouTube. Follow me on social media if you want to. I'm on Instagram and Bluesky. And if you are interested in signing up for my weekly email newsletter, remember that you can do that at bradlisti.substack.com. And if you listen to this program regularly, if you tune in week after week, episode after episode, I hope you will support this show over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. It's a lot of work doing this show. I've been doing it for almost 15 years. So if you've been listening for a while and enjoying it, pitch in a few bucks every month so that I can keep making this show. I would love nothing more. If you want to join the Otherppl Book Club, that is my book club, you can do that over at otherppl.com, the show's official website. Pick up an Otherppl t-shirt while you're there. And if you want to sign up for the waitlist for my new company, again, it is called Deep Dive. The debut course is How to Write a Novel. I'm the host of the course. And you can join the waitlist at www.deepdive.audio, and you can follow Deep Dive on Instagram and Bluesky. Last but not least, if you have 2 minutes and you want to do me a quick favor, please rate this show wherever you listen. Give it a rating at Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever. Just rate it, review it if that's an option. It helps the show in the algorithm, and it helps it find new listeners. So I think that does it for today. Really great conversation with Andrew Lipstein. One more time, his book is called Something Rotten, and I will be back on Thursday, God willing. with my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez for a new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, this podcast's weekly pop culture assessment. So Mira's been dealing with a lot of chaos lately. So we've missed, I think, like 3 of the last 4 weeks, but hopefully she's back, and you will witness her triumphant return on Thursday. Stay tuned.